So, the story I will be reading today is because I am old and this is fun. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Donatello, the Radical Robot. Here. This was written by Stephen Murphy, and the book itself, well, you won't be able to see it, but has illustrations by Dan Berger and Brian Thomas. To the Mirage Studio artists, without whom there wouldn't be any stories to tell or sell. Let's get the prologue, because everybody knows the prologue. Just about who everybody is and what they do. The four turtles and their sensei, Splinter, were walking through the city. It was night, and they were all in disguise. Each of the turtles wore an overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat. You don't have to forgive me, I have Gidget in my lap too. Splinter wore a turtleneck sweater and a wool cap. Michelangelo was the first to notice that Donatello was carrying something in one of his hands. "What's that thing?" asked Michelangelo. He was quite puzzled. "It's a motion detector," replied Donatello. Oh, hold on. Kid, you're knocking stuff off with her tail. He held it up for Michelangelo to see. "What does it do?" asked Splinter. "Tells us when something nearby is moving. This way no one should be able to surprise us or even see us," said Donatello. Donatello liked to invent things. He liked gadgets. He liked to know how they worked. He was very fond of taking things apart. Sometimes he put things back together differently than they were originally. "That motion detector looks a lot like our remote control for our television," Leonardo observed. Donatello blushed. "It is," he admitted. "I thought it would be more useful this way." Just then, the light on the motion detector flashed red. "Ah, thank you, Gidget." "Someone's coming," whispered Donatello. The turtles and Splinter hid behind some trash cans in an alley. A woman walked by. She had a small dog on a leash. The dog wore a pink sweater. The sweater had letters written on it. The letters spelled out the dog's name. Its name was Noodles. Raphael thought the dog looked silly. He thought its name was even sillier. Raphael did his best not to laugh out loud. The dog wanted to sniff the trash cans, but the woman pulled it by its leash. The dog hurried along. "They're gone now," said Donatello. "Noodles," Raphael giggled. The red light on the motion detector went out. The turtles and Splinter continued along their way. They were going to the public library. Donatello had some books that were nearly overdue. "What books are you returning?" asked Leonardo. "Just these three," said Donatello. He held them up for Leonardo to see. One book was entitled Electronics for Beginners. Another was called Build Your Own Computer. The third book was The Age of the Dinosaurs. Donatello liked dinosaurs. He dreamed of someday inventing a time machine that could take him back to the time of the dinosaurs. That way he could combine his two hobbies. "We have arrived," announced Splinter. "The public library." Donatello went over to the night depository. There was a slot on the outside wall of the library. The slot was large enough to allow a large book to fit through. Donatello slid his three books in. He could hear them fall into the box on the inside of the library. Kerplunk, kerchunk, kerdunk went the three books. Just then, Donatello noticed that the red light on the motion detector was flashing. The turtles and Splinter hid behind some bushes next to the library. The red light on the motion detector continued to flash. Michelangelo stuck his head through the bushes. He looked right and left. He looked up and down. He looked this way and that. "I don't see anyone," he reported. Splinter stuck his head through the bushes alongside Michelangelo's. Splinter looked straight across the street. "Look there," he said to Michelangelo. "Oops, I looked in every direction except straight," said Michelangelo softly. He was embarrassed. Across the street, four boys were crouched by the door of a store. "Gee, it looks like those boys are about to break into that building," said Donatello. "Yo!" he yelled. Suddenly, an alarm sounded. It was coming from the building. The alarm was very loud. The four boys rushed away. "Look!" said Raphael. The turtles and Splinter looked. The four boys were running towards a fifth figure. This figure looked like a man, only larger. It stood stiffly in the dark shadows, directly over an open manhole. Then, with a quick machine-like movement, it It directed the boys down into the sewers. Within moments, the boys and the mysterious fifth figure had disappeared down the manhole. "Hey!" yelled Raphael. "Hey is for horses," replied Michelangelo. "They're getting away," continued Raphael. "We should do something." "You're right, Raphael. Let us follow them and learn more," directed Splinter. The Turtles and Splinter went into a darkened alley. Swiftly they removed their disguises. Off came their overcoats. Off came their hats. Donatello helped Splinter take off his sweater, which was very tight. They placed the clothes in a pile and hid the pile behind a dumpster. "Gee, I wonder what those boys were up to," said Raphael. "I wonder if they were really about to break into that store." "Sure looked that way to me," said Michelangelo. "Otherwise, why would they have to run away?" asked Leonardo. The other turtles looked at Leonardo. He had made a good point. "Weapons at the ready," said Splinter. Each turtle took out his weapon. Michelangelo whipped out a nunchaku. He twirled it around several times in the night air. It made a slight breeze. Donatello pulled out his bow staff. He balanced one of its ends perfectly on a finger, and then he held it firmly at its center. Raphael held up a sigh in the streetlight. He liked the way the light played across its polished metal surface. Leonardo withdrew one of his katana blades. He held it with great respect. The blade was very sharp. Splinter took out his walking stick. He had taken it with him when he left Japan many years before. The stick was very hard and was a trusty weapon. He then directed the turtles towards the open manhole. The turtles and Splinter entered the sewer in silence. They paused to let their eyes adjust to the darkness within. They gripped their weapons. They smelled the air. They listened very carefully. It was very quiet within the sewer. Too quiet. "This is a perfect time to use my motion detector," whispered Donatello. He reached into his belt and withdrew the small device. The motion detector was already flashing. "Uh-oh," said Donatello. Just then, a large figure rushed towards them from out of the shadows. "Uh-oh," repeated Donatello. The large figure came thundering into their midst. It was a robot. It was blue and purple, and its eyes were solid white. It had a small symbol of a foot on its forehead, but it didn't have a mouth. It was big and powerful, and looked very mean. The robot spread out its muscular arms and swatted the turtles aside like they were little flies. Boff! Slam! Gunch! Thunk! Went the bodies of the four turtles as they were struck by the robot. "Aha! Here is our mysterious shadowed figure," Splinter noted, quickly avoiding the robot's move. At the same time, Splinter took a closer look at the foot symbol that marked the robot's forehead. "There is something very familiar about that symbol," he thought to himself. "That wasn't very sporting of you," said Leonardo to the robot, getting to his feet. "In fact, I think it was very rude." Leonardo leapt at the robot. He had both of his katana blades out, one in each hand. Katang! Katang! Went the blades, striking the robot's shoulders. But the katanas bounced right off the robot. They didn't even make a scratch. Not even a dent. "My turn!" yelled Michelangelo. He made a tough-looking face at the robot. Michelangelo held a nunchaku in each hand. He whirled and twirled first one and then the other. Then he whirled and twirled them together. It was very impressive. The robot looked at the nunchakus. It seemed puzzled. Sensing its confusion, Michelangelo let the robot. Whappity, whappity, whap! Went the nunchakus, striking the robot on both sides of its head. But the nunchakus bounced right off the robot. Didn't even make a scratch. Not even a dent. "I guess I'll have to handle this," said Raphael. With that, he jumped onto the robot's shoulders. He used both his sides like two jackhammers. He brought them down repeatedly on top of the robot's head. Chick, 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 went the sighs, right at the center of the robot's head. One sigh made a little scratch. The other made a small dent. The robot didn't like this. He picked Raphael off his shoulders and flung him into Splinter. "Sorry, master," said Splinter. "Your foot is on my tail," replied Splinter. Donatello faced the robot. He placed his bow staff down upon the ground. The robot looked down at Donatello. If it had a mouth, it probably would have smiled an evil smile. The robot advanced towards Donatello. "I sure hope you know what you're doing, Donatello," called Leonardo. "So do I," said Donatello. The robot towered towards him. It flexed its muscular arms. It began to curl its powerful hands into fists. Donatello ducked and ran straight between the robot's legs. Then he climbed up at its back before the robot could turn around to grab him. "What are you doing?" asked Michelangelo. "I'm looking for something that I read about in one of my library books," answered Donatello. Michelangelo thought about it. But he knew it couldn't have been the book about dinosaurs. Maybe the book about computers? Possibly. Or maybe the book on electronics. "Book on electronics?" asked Michelangelo. The robot was reaching back for Donatello. Donatello clung to the robot's back. Its arms couldn't bend to reach Donatello. "That's right, Mikey," said Donatello. "I read that many electronics have this kill switches hidden on them." He squinted at the back of the robot's head. "What's a kill switch?" asked Michelangelo. Donatello smiled. He jabbed a finger at the spot in the back of the robot's head. The robot fell to the floor. "A kill switch is like an emergency off button," he answered. Donatello stood proudly over the fallen robot. "I simply shut the robot off," he beamed. The turtles and Splinter stood around the fallen robot. Raphael kicked at one of its arms. Leonardo poked at one of its legs. "Well done, my son," Splinter said to Donatello. "Thanks, master," said Donatello. Donatello looked down at the robot. Its design impressed him. Master?" asked Donatello. "Can I take him home?" Splinter and the other turtles stared at Donatello in amazement. "Why do you want to take the robot home?" asked Splinter, clearly puzzled by Donatello's question. "So I can see how it works," Donatello replied. "Maybe the robot can provide us clues to what these boys were up to, or even where they went," said Leonardo. "Right," said Donatello. "And maybe we can even learn who built the robot." Splinter looked down at the fallen robot. His gaze lingered for a moment at the foot symbol that marked the robot's forehead. Splinter turned to Donatello. "All right," said Splinter. Donatello smiled. Donatello was up late. His brothers and Splinter had all gone to sleep several hours ago. But Donatello stayed up to work on his new robot. He had discovered that the back of the robot's head was a panel. The panel was like a small door. It opened to reveal a programming pad. There were buttons with the alphabet written on them. There were buttons with symbols. There were several small circuit boards. Don was determined to learn how to program the robot. He thought long and deep. He tinkered and he fiddled. He thought and he thought. He made a cup of hot chocolate. He stayed up very, very late. In the morning, Splinter found Donatello asleep on the couch. Splinter went about his morning routine. He decided not to wake Donatello. He didn't bother to wake the other turtles either, asleep in their bunk beds. He knew they needed their rest after yesterday's battle. Splinter went to the kitchen. He wanted to make himself his usual morning of ginseng tea. In the kitchen, Splinter met up with a big surprise. The robot was making Splinter's tea. It had placed a tea bag in a cup and set the cup upon the kitchen table. The robot had placed a spoon next to the cup and had taken the jar of honey out of the cupboard. It was in the process of boiling some water on the kitchen stove. The robot was wearing an apron. It turned to look at Splinter. It had a mouth. It would have smiled the friendliest of smiles. "Donatello!" shouted Splinter. Donatello awoke from a dream. The dream had been about dinosaurs that rode motorcycles. Donatello had been helping a Tyrannosaurus change a flat tire. "Donatello!" shouted Splinter a second time. Donatello ran into the kitchen. So did his three brothers, who had been awakened by Splinter's shouts. "What's wrong, master?" asked Donatello. "Breakfast appears to be served," responded Splinter. The turtles looked at the kitchen table. The table was covered with dishes of food. "Itchy, what are you doing?" "Oh, you're playing with my sandal. Okay." There were pancakes and waffles and 3 types of syrup. There were 2 types of toast and 5 brands of cereal. There was a selection of cooked eggs and a choice of bacon or sausage. Also whole milk and skim milk in both regular and chocolate. A big bowl of fresh fruit and some porridge with cinnamon in it was the center of the table. "Who prepared all of this?" asked Leonardo. "He did," answered Splinter, pointing to the robot. The robot was busy baking fresh donuts. Donatello smiled. After breakfast, the turtles napped. Michelangelo was the first to wake up. He had fallen asleep on the kitchen floor with a jelly donut in his right hand. He finished eating the donut, then rolled over to the side and looked into the living room. His brothers were still asleep. Splinter sat in his favorite chair, meditating. The robot was brushing Splinter's fur. Michelangelo stared at the robot. He had an idea. Later, when everyone was awake, the turtles exercised. Then it came time for their ninja training. Splinter noticed how slowly the turtles were moving during the lessons. Must be the big breakfast they had earlier, he concluded. After training, Michelangelo told his brothers his idea. Everyone agreed it was a good one. With Donatello's help, Michelangelo put his plan into action. It was time for supper. Excellent idea. I'm sorry, wrong voice. Excellent idea, Michelangelo, said Raphael. Thanks, replied Michelangelo. The Turtles and Splinter sat around the kitchen table. The robot was standing by the counter. It was opening 6 boxes of 6 different brands of pizza. Michelangelo had sent the robot out for pizza. The robot had gone all over the city buying the best pizzas in town. They even bought a big chunk of cheese for Splinter. The Turtles ate all the pizzas, even the crust. Soon, they were sleepy. If you must nap, please sleep in your beds and not on the kitchen floor, said Splinter. The Turtles went to their bedroom. They shared the same room and had 2 double bunk beds. Michelangelo and Raphael had the top bunks. Donatello and Leonardo had the bottom bunks. I just thought of something, said Donatello. What's that? Asked Leonardo. The robot doesn't have a name, said Donatello. I know what we can call him, said Raphael. What's that? Asked Donatello. Raphael giggled. Noodles, he said. The 4 boys were in trouble. They had lost one of their leader's robots, and now they were facing their leader. What happened? The leader yelled. He was a very mysterious figure, who always sat in the deep shadows of his headquarters. The leader wore a mask. The boys had never seen his face. He was always angry and liked to yell. The boys were afraid of him. Well, continued the leader, what happened to my robot? We were being followed, said one of the boys. Yeah, said another. We tried to break into that store the way you wanted, but we were scared away. Scared away? By who? Demanded the leader. He was growing angry with the boys. We don't know. We kept going. The robot stayed behind the fight, said the first boy. It isn't our fault, said one of the other boys. Fools, said the leader. The leader stared at them for a long time. Then he reached into his cape and pulled out a small device. He held it in one of his hands. The device looked a lot like a remote control to a big television. Then it had one big button. What's that thing? Asked the boy. It's a homing beacon. An override switch, growled the leader. It sends out a signal that orders the robot home. It also overrides any programming that may have been done to the robot, he said with a smirk. He pressed the button. The robot was busy sweeping up the kitchen. The Turtles had made quite a mess eating their supper. There were anchovies under the table and pepperoni slices on the chairs, not to mention all the crumbs that were everywhere. The robot hurried. Donatello had programmed it to clean the bathroom once it had finished in the kitchen. Suddenly, the robot stopped. There was a flash of light deep within its eyes. The robot stiffened, looked at the broom in its hands, and at the apron it was wearing. If it had a mouth, it would have smiled a very nasty smile. The robot lifted one of its feet and squashed an anchovy beneath its heavy boot. Homing beacon had found its mark. Donatello! Shouted Splinter. Donatello awoke from a dream. His dream had been about dinosaurs that roamed the cities of an alien world. Donatello was a scientist who was trying to herd the dinosaurs into a huge spaceship. An asteroid was about to collide with the dinosaurs' world. The impact would send tons of dust into the planet's atmosphere, blocking out all sunlight. Within months, the planet would be too cold for the dinosaurs to live upon. It was up to Donatello to save the dinosaurs from certain extinction. Donatello! Shouted Splinter a second time. Donatello woke up and ran into the living room with his brothers. Your help will be most welcome, said Splinter. He and the robot were fighting. It looked as though they were fencing with swords, but neither of them had a sword. Splinter held his walking stick. He was trying to hit the robot with it. The robot held up the broom. It was trying to hit Splinter with it. The walking stick and the broom smashed against each other. This happened many times. It looked exactly like Splinter and the robot were fencing, thought Donatello. But then this would mean that the robot had somehow turned bad again, he realized. Weapons at the ready, commanded Splinter. The Turtles joined Splinter in the battle against the rampaging robot. I wish Noodles would take off that apron, said Raphael. He giggled. He had a hard time taking the fight seriously with the robot dressed up in that outfit. The robot struck Raphael with the broom. Raphael stopped giggling. Hey, this is serious, he said. Most serious, said Splinter. Donatello did not understand what had gone wrong. The robot should not be fighting. It should be cleaning the bathroom. Something had gone wrong with the robot's reprogramming, Donatello realized. Just then, the robot kicked over Splinter's favorite chair. Then it tipped over the coffee table. and knocked over the bookcase. Books spilled all over the floor. The robot picked up the turtle's favorite book on Bruce Lee and hit Leonardo over the head with it. Time to act, thought Donatello. He used his bow staff as a pole vault. Donatello flew through the air and landed on the robot's back. He jabbed his fingers at the kill switch in the back of the robot's neck. This will shut off the robot, thought Donatello. It didn't. The robot threw Donatello into a lamp. It knocked Raphael and Michelangelo's heads together. Conk! Went their heads. The robot lifted one of its heavy boots and brought it down on Splinter's tail. Splinter squealed. He turned to Donatello. This robot has got to go, he said. Oh, hold on. Go on, Gibby. Gotta get off my lap. The robot picked up a big box of the Turtles' comic books. The box was old and weak, and its bottom came out. Comics spilled everywhere. Many of the pages folded. Several covers came off completely. Donatello knew that Splinter was right. The robot had to go, and Donatello knew it was his responsibility to get rid of the robot. It had been his idea to bring the robot home. What could he do, though? He wondered. The robot lunged towards Donatello's computer. Donatello had built the computer himself. He learned how to build it from reading a library book. He was proud of his computer. It had taken a lot of work to assemble. The robot began to pick up the computer. Donatello leapt into action. He struck the robot with his bow staff. It was a mighty blow. Donatello had never struck anything with such force before. The robot fell to the floor with a heavy crash. It was very still. Donatello knelt down by the fallen robot. He could hear the circuits popping within the robot's head. He heard some whirring sounds and other noises that didn't sound right. Then Donatello saw a light flash on and off behind the robot's eyes. The robot made no more sounds. It lay very still. The battle was over. The Turtles and Splinter were triumphant. So, it was Splinter. He was sitting in his favorite chair. He was thinking. The Turtles were on the floor. They were going through their comic book collection, and they weren't happy. Donatello looked up at Splinter. He held a copy of Mego Dino Corpse in his right hand. In his left hand, he held its cover. It was one of his favorite comic books. Yes, master? Asked Donatello. Splinter addressed Donatello. Why do you think the robot turned against us? He asked. Donatello had given this a lot of thought. I think someone reprogrammed my reprogramming, he answered. But no one could have come in here without our knowing it, said Leonardo. He was trying to unfold a crease in the cover of Samurai from Saturn. I think someone reprogrammed the robot using a remote control, said Donatello. He did it from very far away, from wherever the robot came from, he added. It's the only solution I can come up with, he concluded. Splinter thought about this. He leaned back in his chair and curled his tail into a circle. He agreed with Donatello. Splinter knew that whoever built the robot was a powerful and evil person. Splinter looked at his adopted sons. He knew that they had much more training to undergo before being ready to battle such a powerful villain. He then crawled down and helped the Turtles sort out their comic book collection. Later, Splinter made hot chocolate for everyone. He decided it was time to tell them what he suspected was the meaning of the foot symbol that was marked on the robot's forehead. My sons, Splinter began, did you notice anything strange about the robot's appearance? It didn't have a mouth, Michelangelo answered. Yes, but besides that, said Splinter. It was blue and purple, and its eyes were solid white, Raphael replied. Yes, but was there anything else? Asked Splinter. There was a symbol of a foot on its forehead, said Leonardo. Correct, said Splinter. The symbol of the foot. What importance does the symbol have in our lives? Especially in my own. The ninja clan that you belonged to in Japan was called the Foot, Donatello exclaimed. Precisely, said Splinter. I fear the Foot clan may be responsible for the robot, as well as for the boys who tried to break into that store near the library. I don't understand, Master Splinter, said Michelangelo. I thought the Foot clan was a good clan. It was under my leadership, replied Splinter, but perhaps not so under the leadership of the man who stole the leadership from me, the evil and dishonorable Oroku Saki. Gee, said Leonardo, if Saki's behind the robot, then maybe he's here in America and he's up to no good. Perhaps so, said Splinter. That is why we must pay close attention to our surroundings at all times, and why you four must work very hard at your ninja training. Later that evening, Splinter allowed the four turtles to take a short walk to the sewer tunnel that led from their home. You could tell they wanted an opportunity to talk amongst themselves. Wow, what if Orokusaki really is in America and created that robot? What are we going to do if we run into him? Asked Michelangelo, a little worried. We'll kick his shell, replied Raphael, just like we did the noodles. He giggled. Then he kicked in an old soda can and sent it flying down the sewer tunnel. I bet we'll have to use all of our ninja training, said Leonardo. And all of our knowledge, especially if Saki has more robots at his command, said Donatello. No problem, said Raphael, pointing at his two sides. You're right, Michelangelo exclaimed. With our combined ninja skills and our 4 gazillion brain cells, we're ready for anything. With that, they slapped each other's palms together, yelled, Cowabunga! They then headed back inside, began taping up their damaged comic books. And there's your story for tonight. At least you all behaved this time. We'll do this again soon, so long as you guys continue to behave. So, I will now let you guys go, because I am tired and I'm going to bed. Good night.